All right, Hebrews chapter 11. All right, in order. I need them in order. All right, what is faith? It is first, hearing from God. Second, believing God. Third, doing. Hearing, believing, acting. Hearing, believing, doing. That is faith. That is true biblical faith. It must have all three of those elements, or it is not truly biblical faith. It is not what the Bible would call faith. So, again, I told you I was just going to pound that home a little bit, and I have been, and I'm going to continue, actually, even after we're out of Hebrews 11. But I want to go ahead and continue in Hebrews 11. And today, we're going to look at, must have been a long day already, said tonight. Today we're going to look at the story of Moses. So last week we looked at Abraham. So I kind of want to just kind of give you a little bit of a recount of the story of Moses. It starts, I guess, in Exodus chapter 2 is where it really starts. And if you remember the story that, I was going to give you a little history lesson right here. A little biblical history lesson. And you know what? I'm going to do it. And it really is not important to the sermon, but I don't know. I just want you to be able to piece everything together as all of these things come to be. Of course, we know that God initially gave the promise to Abraham. You're going to be the father of a great nation. You're going to have descendants that are going to be as many as the stars of the sky, as many as the sands on the seashore. So Abraham had his son Isaac. Isaac was the son through whom the promise passed through. And then Isaac had a son, Jacob. Remember Jacob and Esau. But Jacob is the son through whom the promise passed through. That's why you often hear Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all said together, because they are the lineage of the promise. So Abraham went to Canaan. He's living in Canaan. We talked about this actually last week. He's actually living in what is the promised land, but he's not possessing it. And the scriptures do say that Isaac and Jacob also lived in the promised land. They lived in Canaan, but again, they didn't actually possess it. So anyhow, Jacob will give birth to the sons that will become the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. So the 12 tribes of Israel the patriarch of each one is going to be one of the sons of Jacob. Dan, Naphtali, Reuben, Judah, all of them. The patriarch, he's the one that gives birth. He has this one son named Joseph, right? So Joseph is the son that none of the other brothers like. You remember they wanted to kill, they hated him. He had these dreams and God was going to use him and God was going to work through him. And he told his brothers about how they were going to bow down to him and all this kind of stuff. And they didn't like it, this kid telling them this stuff. They wanted to kill him. And you remember they started plotting to kill him. And finally, I can't remember if it was Reuben or Judah. I can't remember. One of them said, look, we can't kill him. I mean, that's our brother after all. And so you remember what they did? They sold him into slavery, right? And they sold him. He eventually winds up in Egypt. So he eventually winds up in Egypt, and also there's a lot of stories in here that I'm not telling you, but through a series of circumstances, he actually rises to a place of prominence in Egypt. He actually comes to a place of prominence. He's second only to the Pharaoh, so he's like just one person under the Pharaoh, even though he's not an Egyptian. So then there's this great famine that happens throughout all the land. And so Jacob and his sons and their clans back there in Canaan, he sends his sons to Egypt because he hears that there's food in Egypt. And we know that there was food, and we know that it was because of Joseph and the preparation that he made. So here come all of Joseph's brothers. These are the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. So here they all come to Egypt. Joseph recognizes them, although they don't recognize him. And so eventually he reveals himself to them and all that. And he says, go get my dad, go get the whole family. There's food here. Go get everybody and y'all come to Egypt. So they go back and they get everybody. They get all of their family. They get Jacob. They get everybody and they come to Egypt. So now this is how the nation of Israel winds up in Egypt. They come there to get over the famine. So they're there, they're living in Egypt, and they begin to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and multiply and multiply and multiply. So we're obviously talking about generations and generations that go by. And when you start in Exodus probably in chapter 1, might be in chapter 2. After generations go by, one day there's this, it says there arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. In other words, so much time had passed that this person that became the leader of Egypt, he didn't remember who Joseph was. He didn't know Joseph. He didn't know any of that. So all he does is he looks out and he sees all of these foreign people, all of these Hebrew people living all around his people. And he says, you know what? If our enemy ever decides to attack us, all they got to do is get those people to join them, and we're going to be in big trouble. So instead, what he does is he enslaves them. He enslaves the Israelites. He puts taskmasters over them. They begin to have to work hard to build these cities. And so that's how they came to be, we've talked about how they were slaves in Egypt. That's how they came to be slaves in Egypt. So at the right time, obviously, they don't like being a slave, obviously. They don't like the oppression that they're living under. They cry out to God. They pray to God, and God hears their prayer. And it comes time. Now, we're talking like 400 years, all right? And so it comes time for God to deliver them. So God is going to deliver them through Moses, is who we're going to talk about today. And so the story of Moses, and again, it starts in about Exodus chapter 2. So he sees the people are so great in number, so he enslaves them, but he also does something else. The Pharaoh also does something else. He gets the Hebrew midwives together and he says, look, whenever you're doing your duty as a midwife to them Hebrew women, when they have the baby, they said, if it's a girl, you can let it live, but if it's a boy, you have to kill it. You have to throw it in the river. You have to do so. Well, the Hebrew midwives, they're not going to do that, right? They're not going to do that to their own people. And so they can't. And it's actually kind of funny, I think. They're like, he's like, what's going on? And this is an aside, but he's like, what? You can read it in Exodus. He's like, what's going on? How come you're not doing anything? And they're like, well, these Hebrew women, they're strong, man. They give birth before we can even get there. And so, we don't have the opportunity. So he passes a law. And it seems to indicate really among even his own people that if they have a child, if it's a boy, it has to be thrown in the river. And if it's a girl, it can live. So anyhow, Moses is born. And they don't kill it. They refuse to kill him. And they keep him as long as they can until he's obviously going to become noticeable, right? That there's this little boy that hasn't been killed. And so what mom does is she makes this little kind of a basket thing, and she makes it waterproof. She puts stuff around it, and she puts Moses inside this little ark. They call it an ark in the Bible. It's a little ark. Puts him inside this little ark, and she puts this little ark out in a little pool of water there. And so she puts him out, and then Moses' older sister stands there to watch and see what's going to happen. And so one of the Pharaoh's daughters, the king of Egypt's daughter, she comes down to this little pool. She's going to take a bath there. And so her little servants are walking around the edge, and they see this little ark. And so she grabs the ark, and she finds this little baby inside, right? And so Moses' sister is standing there, and Moses' sister says to her, she says, do you want me to get somebody to nurse this little boy for you? We'll nurse it for you. And I guess she, those little eyes, those little hands, those little feet, right? How can you resist, right? She's like, nobody's claiming this little baby. She says, sure, go get someone to nurse the baby for me. So Moses' sister runs and gets, guess who? Moses' mother. All right, she runs and gets his mother. So that mom actually gets to raise Moses during some very formative years of his life. I don't know how long, they nursed, but it was a while, right? It was more than a day or two, right? Right? Thank you. I'm assuming it was more than a couple days. But she gets to raise Moses during his formative years. And I'm kind of reading between the lines here, but you'll see why in a minute. it's pretty evident that she implants in him who he is, that he is a Hebrew. She implants in him the truth about their God and about the Hebrew God. She implants in him about the nation and about one day of a coming Messiah. She lays this whole foundation in him in the time that she has with him as a young child. And then when it's time for him to be weaned, she takes him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she gives him to be raised. He's raised 40 years in the palace. He's raised as the grandson of the king of Egypt, and all of the privileges and all of the perks and all of the riches that would go with being the grandson of the king of Egypt in that day belonged to him, and they were upon him. Until one day, I'm really getting ahead of myself now, and I'm looking for a good place to stop. That's a good place to stop right there. So let me start at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. It says that by faith Moses, when he was born, he was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. So the first thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about the faith of Moses' parents. We're talking about faith here, and it says that it was by faith that his parents hid him, and it says that they weren't afraid of the king's command to kill all the little baby boys. Here's one of the things that I want to point out to you. True biblical faith overrides fear, all right? True biblical faith, when you truly have faith, it overrides fear. If you remember the story of Jesus and his disciples, when the storm came up and they woke him up and they said, don't you care that we're about to die here? And his response to them was, after he calmed the storm, his response to them was, why are you so afraid? Don't you have faith? Why are you so afraid and you are faithless? Look, I've been harping on the fact that we are going to face uncertain times, that we are going to face circumstances, that God is going to ask us to do things that are unreal. God is going to ask us to do things that we really in our hearts and our minds know that we are incapable of doing. And it has that ability to draw up this fear in us. But true faith, hearing from God, believing in God, then the part that helps us act on it is that true faith helps us to actually overrides the fear of the unknown and the fear that it would put inside of us. We talked about Abraham last week, but there's one little part that I didn't address and that I didn't talk about. Starts in verse 17. We know the story. If you know the story of Abraham, you know that his faith was tested in that he was told to take Isaac up on Mount Moriah and to sacrifice him there. Now, Abraham knew, because God had told him, Isaac was the son of promise. So Abraham knew that the promise had to pass through Isaac. Abraham knew that Isaac had to give birth to the next descendant. Abraham knew. He knew that this was the promise, and when God told him to go and sacrifice him, I'm sure it made absolutely no sense at all. But we know that Abraham did it, and look at what it says in verse 19. Well, let me start in verse 17 just so you'll know. That's what it's really talking about. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, he offered up Isaac, and he who received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. So what he's saying there is that Abraham just believed that if God had to, no matter what happened, he knew Isaac was the next in line. He knew the promise was going to pass through Isaac. And Abraham just believed that if God had to, he could literally just raise Isaac up from the dead. Now had never been done up to that point. There had never been a resurrection up to the point of Abraham. It had never been seen. It had never been done. He didn't have anything to base it on. He didn't say, well, God did that there, or God died. No, he can do it again. It had never been done. He just believed that God was able. So here's the question for you and for me in the things that we face that bring this fear into our lives. Do you really believe that God is able? Now, that's the thing. Do you really believe that he is able? Now, remember what I say, and remember, you're going to get tired of hearing me say this over the next, 15 years or so. But listen, what you do says more about what you believe than what you say. What you do is a better indicator of what you believe than what you say. I believe that God is able. Then why don't you trust him in those uncertain circumstances? I believe that God is able. Then why do you live in fear when the circumstances seem to brood that? True faith overcomes fear. True faith overrides fear. Do you believe that God is able to do the impossible? And I'm reminded of the story of, who were they? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I didn't give you guys this one because I just now thought of it, but it's the perfect example. It's in Daniel chapter 7, and you remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Nebuchadnezzar had built a statue. Nebuchadnezzar played a chime every day. And at the sound of this chime that went off, they had to bow and they had to pray towards his statue. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to do it. And so he said the edict was that if they didn't do it, he would throw them in the fire. And he brought Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in. And he says, look, he says, I don't want to do this. He said, I don't want to throw you in the fire. He said, but I'm telling you what, when it goes off, when the chime chimes, if you don't bow down and if you don't worship that statue that I've built, you're going to force my hand and we're going to have to throw you in the fire. And you know what they said to him? They said, our God is able to deliver us. They said, our God is able to deliver us. Now they went on to say, but even if he doesn't, it doesn't matter. We're still not going to worship you. But the point is, do you really believe that God is able? And if you really believe that God is able, then why don't you take the step of faith when he asks you to take it? What you do says more about what you believe than what you say. If you really believe that God is able, why is it that when you feel like he's asking you to do something, you look at it and you say, I know I can't do that. I know that it's impossible for me to do that. I can't reconcile this God asking me to do it with what I know that I have the ability to do. So I just won't do it. That's not faith. What you do says more about what you believe than what you say. Moses' parents were not afraid of the king's edict, so they kept Moses. They kept him personally as long as they could. Then they trusted in the Lord in what was going to happen to him. And the Lord actually blessed them and gave her the chance to raise him for a few more years before he became the son of Pharaoh. Okay. Now, by faith, Moses, verse 24, by faith, Moses, of Hebrews 11, by faith, Moses, when he became of age, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ of greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, because he looked to the reward. And so by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. So if you remember, one of the things that I've been doing in this is I've been looking for the things that fuel their faith, for the things that sort of help their faith to catch fire and help their faith to burn and give them this endurance. And so for Abraham, it says that he was looking for a reward. He was looking to a reward, and he could see him who was invisible. And so here was Abraham. Let me do this first. Let me just do this. And I'm just trying to use some. I'm just trying to get you to think along a certain way. Keep in mind that the fuel for Moses was that he was looking for a reward, a spiritual reward, and that he was seeing the invisible. He was seeing God. He was looking to God and trying to see God. Let me ask you this. Now, keep this in mind now. Remember, what you do says more about what you believe than what you say, right? You're going to get tired of hearing that. You know why you're really going to get tired of hearing about it? Because it's going to be very convicting in your life over the next 15 years or however long. It went from 10 to 15. Did anybody catch that? Did anybody catch that? Or over however the next length of time is that you and God allow me to be here. Do you really believe? Who do you believe can take care of you and your family better? God or your employer? Who do you believe can really take care of you better? God or your retirement plan? No, be careful before you answer this. Who do you really believe can take care of and meet your needs better? God or that paycheck you bring home every week? So if you are saying God, then why do you have such a problem giving? Because what you do says more about what you believe than what you say. Thank you. We have one tither. No, I'm teasing. No, but listen, that we have more than that. But listen, do you understand what I'm saying? If you really believe that God is able, and if you really believe that God is going to take care of you and meet your needs, then why do you struggle so much with giving him 1/10? Well, because my 10th isn't very much. Look, if you can't give a dime on a dollar, you're not going to give $1 on $10, and you're not going to give $10 on $100, and you're not going to give $100 on $1,000. And if you won't give $100 on $1,000, you're not going to give $1,000 on $10,000. And if you won't give $1,000 on $10,000, you're not going to give $10,000 on $100,000. I'm telling you, if you're not faithful in the little, you're not going to be faithful in the much. And I'm telling you that what we do says more about what we believe than what we say. And if we struggle with giving, it's because we struggle with what we really believe about God. We struggle with our faith. Look, where do you think you're really, and so obviously you're not going to answer this out loud again because what you do says more about what you believe than what you say. Where do you believe that in your life you are really, truly going to find happiness and peace and some sort of contentment in this life? Where do you believe that you're really going to find that? Do you really believe you're going to find it in a career or in God? Do you really believe you're going to find it in success at whatever you set your hand to? Or do you really believe you're going to find it really ultimately in God? Do you really believe that you're going to find it in fame? Well, we'll just do fame and fortune. We'll do the traditional. Do you really believe you're going to find it in being famous? Do you really believe that if you're famous, that it's going to meet those deep inner needs of your heart and of your soul? Or do you believe that the deep inner needs of your heart and soul really are only going to be met spiritually by God? Do you really believe that all of your contentment and all of your peace and all of your happiness is really going to be met by how much money you have and how many things that you own? Or do you really believe that ultimately the deepest parts of your life are going to be met by God? How many of you right now, as you sit there, don't answer this out loud, okay? Answer this in your heart and in your mind. How many of you out there right now would everything that you've got, everything that you've owned, any success that you have, you would gladly give it up if there was a spiritual reality or a spiritual truth that was real and at work in your grandkids' life? How many of you would give it up for your son or your daughter if God would just work that miracle in their life? How many of you would absolutely give it up? So let me ask you this. If you have said in your mind and in your heart that I believe that true contentment and true peace and true happiness really comes spiritually through what God can do, then why do we have trouble giving God even a minute out of our day? If I really believe that that's where I'm really going to find my contentment and my satisfaction, then why do I pour every ounce of energy of my life? And I'm not telling you not to have a career. You understand what I'm saying? But I'm just saying, if that's where I'm seeking for my contentment and my peace and my happiness and my joy, if that's what I'm pouring it into, then that's where I think I'm going to find it. Because if I really believe that it's going to be found in God and found in a relationship with God, then a part of my life is going to pour myself into a relationship with God. I'm not telling you not to have those other things. I'm not telling you not to do those other things. I am telling you, if you really believe that ultimately it's going to be found spiritually in God, then there's going to be a time, there's going to be a point in your life where you are going to pursue God. It said that he looked for the reward. It said that he saw the one who was invisible. He looked for the reward. He was looking for, when it says he was looking for the reward, it's because he understood that the blessings of God were more important than the blessings of this world. So again, take careful look at what it says here. It says that when he became of age, in verse 24, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And then it says he made a choice. He chose to be afflicted, to suffer affliction with his Hebrew people, with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin or that Egypt offered him. And so he, by faith, verse 27, he forsook Egypt, not fearing. Now look, again, I want you to catch the picture of this. Moses becomes of age. He knows who he is. He knows who his people are. Now, I have to really read between the lines, but there's some sense here, you just can't get around it, that he understood that he was set aside for some purpose. You just have to get that. And so Joseph, it's been a long week, okay? It really has. So Moses, he had to make a choice. Now remember, he has spent the last 40 years growing up in the palace in Egypt. He had the best that money could buy. He was used to the best that money could buy. He had the best clothes. He had the best education. He went on the best vacations. I'm jealous. He went on the best vacations. He had the best that money could buy. He had the best of everything. He had fame and he had fortune and he had everything at his fingertips, the world at his fingertips, and he stood there and he had to make a choice. And he chose to turn his back on all of that. It says that he forsook Egypt. That's what he means. He chose to turn his back on all of that so that he could follow God and so that he could follow Christ. Here's what I need you to know. There's something that he understood, although it's not explicitly stated here. All of the things that the world has to offer, let's be honest, the world has some great stuff to offer us that's really cool and makes us happy and makes us smile and makes us feel good. But understand this, if it's from the world, it's not eternal and it's not going to last. It is simply temporary. I have a few verses that I want to read. James 5, verses 2 through 3. James says this, your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and your silver are corroded, and the corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. 2 Corinthians 4, 17 through 18. Let me go ahead and, 2 Corinthians 4, 17 through 18. He says, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working in us a far more exceedingly and eternal weight of glory. We do not look at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And if you remember, I talked last week, if we're going to have a true, strong, powerful faith, we're going to have to set our minds in heaven. We're going to have to set our minds on things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. We're going to have to start seeing the spiritual. We're going to have to start seeking the spiritual reward versus the temporary pleasures. Everything that we have here, it's temporary, it's useless, it's worthless, it will not be eternal. It will not go, your job, your success, your career, all your money, none of it is going with you, and none of it is going to gain you any points with God. We need to start seeking the spiritual reward and see the unseeable. Romans chapter 8, what verse did I have there? Verse 18, Paul says that the sufferings of this present world can't even compare to the glory which shall be revealed in us. In fact, what he says is, the worst that this world has to offer you is not even comparable to the glory that you're going to experience when you get to heaven. We have got to start seeing this. We have got to start seeking the spiritual reward. We have got to start understanding if we truly want to fuel our faith and make ourselves people of faith, we're going to have to. Moses had to make a choice. And guess what? You've got to make a choice. Deuteronomy chapter 30. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 19 and 20. They're about to go into the promised land. And God says, I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. That you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice. He says, I'm calling heaven and earth, and they're going to be witnesses. God says, I've given you two choices. You have a choice. One is the choice for blessing, and one is the choice for cursing. In other words, one is the choice for the temporary, one is the choice for the eternal. One is the choice for the worldly, one is the choice for the spiritual. He says, now you make a choice. I think he's telling us that today. I think we stand at our moment today. I think that we stand. You guys know that I can really kind of, well, let's just not beat around the bush. I try to say, you guys know that I believe that we're living in the end time. You guys know that. Of course, they've all believed it, which is fine. It could be 1,000 years from now. It could be tomorrow. I don't care. I feel like it's upon us. I feel like we're in it. And the important thing is that we've got to live like that. I'm going to tell you what, it's time to make a choice. The days, even in our country, of this casual, culturally acceptable, I'm going to go to church, but I'm not going to be spiritual, those days are over. Those days are gone. And it's time for us to make a choice. In 1 Kings chapter, I'm going to go ahead and wait. I'm going to do Joshua 24:15 first, just because I'm already there. Joshua 24:15, Joshua says to the people, if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, then choose for yourselves today whom you are going to serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dealt. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua says you got to make a choice, and you got to choose today whom you're going to serve. He says, me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 20 to 21, this is that story of Elijah and the great showdown with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. He gathers all the people together, and Elijah says, in verse 21, and Elijah came to all the people and he said, how long are you going to falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people answered him not a word. I'm telling you what, it's time to decide. If you think that you are going to find what you need in the world, then make your decision and go that way. And if you think that what you're going to find is in the Lord, then you need to choose that today and you need to go that way. But it's time for us to make a decision. It's time for us to make a choice. It's time for us to stop trying to straddle the fence. Most of us don't even try to straddle the fence. We try to be on one side of the fence, but keep our hand on the top rail of the fence so that we can wave at the people on the other side of the fence so that they think we're still there, that we're real close. It's time to just choose. We're going through Revelation on Wednesday night. I'm looking at those 7 letters to the 7 churches of Revelation. In the very last one, Jesus says, you're not hot, you're not cold. He said, so I'm literally going to spit you out of my mouth. He says, I would rather you be cold than to be lukewarm. He would rather us to be totally against him than to try to play this game of straddling the aisle. And remember, what you do says more about what you believe than what you say. It's not about what you say. It's not about who you say you are. It's not about who you claim to be. It's not about what you say you believe. It is about the life that you live. And today is a day that you need to make a choice. So tomorrow will be, not tomorrow, next week will be half empty. But that's okay. If we've made the choice, that's okay. I'm teasing. Or maybe not. I don't know. It's time to choose. It's either the world or it's God. It's either the things of the world that are going to meet your needs or it's the things of God that are going to meet your needs, and you need to make a choice. I'm not telling you to quit your job and become a monk. I'm not telling you to quit your job and take your family and move to a foreign country, unless God tells you to. I'm not telling you to do that. But what I am telling you is that if you really believe it's found in God, then you need to make a part of your life that's focused on God. That's what I'm saying. Just to kind of wrap it up, it says by faith, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood. By faith, they experienced deliverance. If you remember that when Moses went in back to Egypt, and he went to Pharaoh, let my people go, and Pharaoh wouldn't do it. And he brought the 10 plagues, and the last plague was this blood. And he told all the children of Israel, you got to go in your house, you got to take a perfect lamb, you've got to kill it. You take the blood, you apply it on the header of your home, you apply it to the doorpost of your home, because tonight death is going to pass through all the land of Egypt, and everyone who's not in a home that's covered by the blood, the firstborn of every home is going to die. But if you are there when the angel sees the blood, he's going to pass over your house. That's why they call it the Passover, and that's their celebration of it. He says that the death angel is going to pass over your house, and the one in your house is going to live. Let me tell you something. There wasn't anything special about the blood. What was special is that they had faith when they applied it, that they believed in the promise from God when they applied it. And it's certainly a picture of the Lamb who was slain, Jesus Christ, the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world. And look, the blood just doesn't automatically give you salvation. It's by your faith that you apply it to your life. And then they went to the Red Sea. You remember how they got delivered and they went to the Red Sea? They got to the Red Sea. This is in Exodus chapter 14. And they get to the Red Sea, and the sea's in front of them, and the Egyptian army's behind them. And they say, here's what they told Moses. They said, what's the matter? There weren't enough graves back there in Egypt. You brought us out here so that we could die out here. So that's exactly what they told him. What's the matter? There weren't enough graves back there? Why'd you bring us out here? We're just going to die. We got this ocean in front of us. We can't go anywhere. We got the Egyptian army coming behind us. And you know what Moses told them in Exodus chapter 14, verse 13? He said, you just stand still and you see the salvation of the Lord. He said, you just stand there and you watch God deliver you. Can you imagine what it was like when God parted those seas and they began to walk through? Can you imagine what it was like to walk through these big two giant walls of water on either side of you? I mean, that's kind of weird, right? It had to be kind of scary too. I mean, what's holding those things up? What's holding them back? What's keeping them up? Look, I'm going to tell you something, but you know what they did, don't you? They walked, right? They walked. They went across. I'm going to tell you something. When you come to a place in your life where you have got nothing left but the promises of God, you're going to take a step and you're going to trust. It's a shame that we make God take us to that place. It's a shame that we make God pull the rug out from underneath us. We make God strip us of everything that's important to us just so we will have nothing left but His promises so that we will reach out to Him. Go ahead and save yourself some heartache and choose Him today. Go ahead and choose Him today for yourself. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Christ is the Lamb now whose blood rescues you and delivers you. Stand up with me if you would.